You've already started recording, Matthew. I see that on the...
All set to go, everyone. Just as a reminder, this is being recorded and we'll put it up for everyone to be able to access afterwards.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Jeff, for those who don't know, and welcome to our third ever Canadian Tour Guide Association of BC Zoom meeting. And with us today as a guest speaker is someone I'll introduce in just a moment. And then later on, depending on time, we might let our guest speaker fill the whole hour as what happened last week. Otherwise, we'll just have a general chit chat amongst ourselves. I've discovered a couple of interesting things from a webinar I was on yesterday regarding, what happens as tours hopefully begin to roll and tour companies and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, today is Aaron Chapman. Aaron, are you there?
I am.
Hi, there's Aaron there. Aaron, just tell us a little bit about yourself. I understand you're another Vancouver boy like myself.
Yes, I guess one of the few. It's odd, when I was growing up, everybody I knew was from Vancouver when I was young as a kid. But nowadays it seems to be a rarer thing. I don't know. Maybe all those people I knew moved away. I don't know. But yes, I'm born and raised in Vancouver. I grew up on the west side area in Kerrisdale. In the 70s, 80s, and I guess I moved in the mid 90s. I was attending UBC in the early 90s, and well, prior to that, Langara. But and then I eventually moved. I was a musician, a touring musician for many, many years, and I would take off from Vancouver on tour for a few months at a time, and then I would come back and I would notice, sort of things, especially in the 1990s, that things had changed. The bookstore on the corner was now a pizza place. It's always the other way. It doesn't go the other way around. The pizza place turns into a bookstore. It's always the other way. But I began to sort of realize and sort of notice the city was changing really before my very eyes in that sense. What happened in Vancouver through those years was quite unique, I think. And I didn't necessarily have an interest in Vancouver history or the city as a whole. When I was younger, I was just where you lived. I think everybody has that opinion. But by the very nature of the fact that I was born and raised here, it suddenly dawned on me that I remembered, my friends and I used to get together that I'd known for a long time, and we talked about, especially nightclubs became an interesting thing for us. And we used to talk about do you remember, when the Cruel Elephant was there, or Richards on Richards, or the Town Pump, or places like that, as they begun to sort of disappear over the years. We sort of stopped ourselves, and we thought, gosh, we're talking like a bunch of 80-year-old men in our 30s here about the way the world, the way the city used to be. And I began to think about that. And I also began to think, as I walked around the city, I'm old enough to remember what the city looked like before Expo. And I remember log booms in Falls Creek. I remember certain street. I can walk to a street corner today, and I remember what it looked like when I was a teenager. Not just in Kerrisdale, all different parts of the city, especially downtown. So it started to kind of foment in this idea of mine, wanting to write about it. Or I remember individually, specifically in about 2001, taking a tour that Peter Vaisborg had done. Now he's not a tour guide, but he works for the city. And I think he works as an urban planner or something like this, but he did a tour of Granville Street, right around the area where the Hudson's Bay building is, and that stretch of Granville Street. And he talked about some of the businesses that used to be there. And I found it very interesting. And he was very enthusiastic and a really engaging guide that way, that kind of brought it to life. And I started to think about my own, memories of Vancouver, and I thought, I was getting into writing a little bit. I was still touring. I was still, playing in different bands, and a couple specific ones. And I would take off on tour for 4 or 5 months across Canada, Europe, United States, and then come back and try and see how the city had changed. And that sort of began to get the wheels spinning, I think, in that regard. That I did start writing about, and I started to think about, what can I do? I want to write about something that's sort of timely. And around 2003 was the time that movie, The Aviator, Martin Scorsese film, came out about Howard Hughes. And I had remembered when Howard Hughes stayed at the Bayshore Hotel in 1972. as a local story. And I thought, geez, it'd be interesting to write about that because I could sell that article, and because it's a timely thing with the movie coming out. And I had done a bunch of I'd done a bunch of research on I'd read a number of books about Hughes. He was sort of a fascinating figure to me that I read about in the 90s. And I thought if I did a little bit more digging and interviewed some people at the hotel that had worked there when he was there, I could build this story. And that ended up being a cover story for the Vancouver Courier. And the Courier began to be, Vancouver Courier, which is now, as by way of a little junk side story, thanks to the COVID virus thing, they've stopped publishing for 3 months. Last month, they put on a sort of a 13-week hiatus because nobody was advertising and whatnot. So the Courier had ended up being a great outlet for me and almost a dress rehearsal for the books that I would later write, which I'll get to in a very quick minute. So as throughout the early 2000s in particular, I guess some of that stuff had been fomenting in the 1990s. And in fact, I know it had. In the later 90s, I was starting to write a little bit about history of the city. But it really got going after that. And I did a number of articles for the Courier that, as I say, ended up being dress rehearsals for the books. The Penthouse nightclub was always a kind of a curious place to me because I remember so much about it as a kid. I remember it in September 1983 when I was 12 years old. I came home from school and there was the news that there had been a shooting at the Penthouse, and Joe Filipponi, the godfather of Seymour Street, as they called it, had been shot and killed there. And I remember my father remarking how, oh God, they shot Joe. And then I was surprised. I thought, does my father know these mafia types? My father was a quiet Kerrisdale lawyer that did real estate and law, wills and things like this, probate, real paperwork, not a criminal lawyer, although he had done that work before I was born, or before I really remembered those days. But the fact that he knew these people, I thought, well, I totally had to reassess my own family. My imagination ran wild. I thought I was walking down Seymour Street downtown one day and walking by the Penthouse, and it said anniversary year. Again, trying to do something timely that just as I'd done with the Howard Hughes piece with the movie The Aviator coming out, I thought it'd be great to do a Penthouse article and maybe do something, because I'd read a few things and it felt like to me they had kind of got it wrong, in some cases, or there had been a lot of myth and mystery about the place, but maybe the truth really behind it all had never really been explained. I didn't know Danny Filipponi, who was the nephew of Joe Filipponi, who currently and has run the Penthouse essentially since after Joe was murdered. And I called down and kind of introduced himself and myself to him. And I, at that time, Danny's father, Ross Filipponi, one of the other sort of famous Filipponi brothers that ran the nightclub. And if you're not aware of the Penthouse or know the story, this was basically a nightclub that really attracted a lot of attention for a few different reasons. In the 50s, every star that came to Vancouver to visit to do a movie premiere or was here for something, they ended up going to the Penthouse. It was open late when you couldn't get a drink. Oddly enough, one could be found for you. And a lot of the theater people, a lot of the people from the other nightclubs in town, once they closed for the night at the Cave or Izzy's or some of these places, went to the Penthouse. So it kind of became a place where the stars hang out. And also it began in the 1970s to get this reputation as a place where local prostitutes, higher-end prostitutes, we were working out of the bar. Now, not the Filipponis weren't pimps, if you will, in that sense, but they just welcomed the business because it brought people into the bar. So they tend to look the other way. So for years, and of course, leading up to the shooting of Joe Filipponi in 1983, the Penthouse was always a place more than any other place in Vancouver, I think, especially because it's still standing. To me, it really held a lot of mystery and a lot of interest and whatnot. So I thought it would be interesting to write a story about that. And I had talked to Ross Filipponi, Danny's father, before he passed, and interviewed him. And when I first called him, I told him that I was George Chapman's son, which sort of opened up the gates because my father had done a little bit of legal work for the Filipponi family. So I was quite, I don't know if I was you want to hear the Godfather theme music swell as I enter the house here and whatnot. But it really it certainly felt that they trusted me because I was a sort of a friend of the family a little bit. Anyway, so I did a bunch of interviews with Ross Filipponi and of course Danny Filipponi, who had run it. The legacy of his father and uncles had been so great. There had been less written about Danny, who I thought was a really interesting figure, who had been sort of given this destiny to run this place, and almost like a monarchy that had been handed to him in that sense. So the article that I did in, I guess that would have been 2007. It came out actually much later, and I wrote it at the beginning of the year, but it went through a bunch of changes and stuff like this, so it came out a bit later. The family thought it was the best. I heard from a bunch of them. Danny called me, and everybody thought it was the best article that they had ever read about the family, about their own family, because it told it fairly. They said for the first time somebody got it right. They always knew how an article would be bad or sensational or dumb about the Pentos if they mentioned the murder first. And I didn't do that because I thought there was a lot more to tell about them, a lot more interesting things, and everybody kind of knew about that. So when I got to it, but I tried to put it in a certain context. And the wake of that, Danny said, "Listen, one day we're going to do a Penthouse book, and you're going to be the guy to write it." And I thought, well, God, I don't have any track records as a writer. I've just been writing these sort of 3,000 word cover articles for the Courier and staking my little claim out at that. There were a lot of other people, a lot of other writers in town, from John Mackey at the Sun, or even John Atkin. Some of you may know that name as well. In town that probably I thought were going to get the first chance to do that, but the interesting thing was I had done a bunch of interviews with people who were quite old and passed away not long afterwards. So I sort of had the last interview with some of these people. So in January, a few years passed. I was still touring, working as a musician, leaving town, coming back, noticing what had changed in the city, and this and that. And in 2012, probably November 20, I'll say this, November 2011, November 30th, 2011, there was a fire at the Penthouse. Very serious one. It almost burned the whole building down. And I remember waking up to the news that morning, and there was on CKNW, and it said, there was a fire at the Penthouse. And I immediately called Danny. I'd gotten to know him a little bit better now. I didn't know him at all going in when I first wrote that story, but I'd gotten to know him and his wife and family a little bit better. And I tried calling him and immediately went to his voicemail. I think I talked to him later, and he said he had about 500 calls and 300 text messages, and everybody trying to get a hold of him. And on the news that night, the camera turned to him, looked like he'd been up for days, and said, "Folks, don't worry, we'll be open in 6 weeks." That ended up being 8 months because of the work they had to do to rebuild back the place. And at the time, there was a question of whether they should just leave it or sell the building or leave it, but they decided to press on. And I thought that was interesting too, for a family that had run this bar, that had been the police had investigated it in the 70s. There was, of course, the murder. There was a reign of red tape over the decades to try and suppress that business. I thought, what a tough sort of family to keep going in the wake of all these hurdles and whatnot. So, in January 2012, I remember this very clearly. I got a call from him, and he said, "Listen," and he had been sort of pitching this book idea to different publishers and whatnot. And I thought, and somebody would get interested, then it sort of would die on the vine. Something would happen, then it would turn, it would change. January 2012, he called me, and I remember I actually got the keys to my place the day that he phoned. I visited an apartment a condo that I bought, he said, I was just walking outside the building with the brand new keys to my home that I'm living in right now, and he said, "Listen, I've talked to these guys at Arsenal Press, local publisher just based in Chinatown, and I think they're going to go for it. Call down there, tell them who you are, and that you're going to be the guy that writes the book." And I thought, Danny, what am I? I'm not a Fuller Brush man that goes from door to door pitching a book idea. I feel awkward just cold calling them like that. And he said, "I talked to them. Don't worry. Call them. Tell them what you want, and we can set up a meeting or something." So I did that, and I had a quick conversation on the phone. It was very positive, and I thought, geez, I think I've got a book deal. On the same day, I bought. If I could do this once a month, this would be great. I'd be very well off. So anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up meeting with them and talked about the original idea for the book, which was a book called Liquor, Lust, and the Law. I wanted a book title that was a bit like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, but that's Liquor, Lust, and the Law. It was the first edition of that book that came out, and it's the story of Vancouver's legendary Penthouse nightclub. The book came out in that year, in Christmas of 2012. I remember I had an idea. I was still playing in the band, and I thought, I had a summer tour coming up, and I thought to myself, there's really no way. I think I can write this in hotel rooms after the shows. I think I have to stay in town a little bit. And I told the rest of the guys in the band, listen, I'm going to sit the first 6 weeks of this out, and I'll join you at the end of the tour, and we'll be good, because it's going to take me maybe a month or half to write. I think I can do that. Well, I was so wrong on that idea. I mean, I started the research not long after I signed the contract to do the book in that January. And I ended up, I had a bunch of interviews that I had already done, but I ended up doing a lot more. And it took months to do, so my music sort of career as a touring musician kind of ended then. And I think quietly, I was kind of looking to get away from it. I was sort of tired of doing as much traveling at that time. It's different when you're 22. You get excited if you're in a parking lot or driving down a highway or the first time you play somewhere. But by, sort of 42, I felt a little bit different, or I was sort of thinking, it wouldn't be so bad to stay home for a little bit longer than we do. So when the book came out in 2012, in December 2012, as Danny himself says, we're sort of just hoping to sell a few books to, some regular customers or, people that were interested in Vancouver history and friends and whatnot. Maybe it'll sell 1,000 copies or something. The very most, 1,500 would be great. It was the #1 book at Chapters, at Indigo Book Warehouse in December of that year. It continued to sell. It continues to sell now, amazingly. It was nominated for a BC Book Prize for that following year. Danny and I went to Government House in Victoria, where we didn't know we weren't allowed to drink in front of the Lieutenant Governor. We sort of had to hide our drinks under the table like the old school days at the speakeasies. The book was a rounding success. In fact, it went into another printing. It was the #1 book that year. And then in the year previous to this, we did a sort of a new edition of the book of Liquor Lesson of Law with the seal of the BC Book Prize on it. And we thought it'd be interesting to sort of pick up a little bit where that story had left off, and perhaps where the Penthouse was heading in terms of a city that, that demolishes so much, and the fact that the Filipponi family are courted by developers almost on a weekly basis to sell the property and put up a condo there and whatnot. But it's hallowed ground to the Filipponi family, that building, and it's where the family kind of, made its bones, and literally in the case of some of the family members that have passed there, working there their whole lives.
So you got into book writing sort of by accident when you left high school, and you said you went to UBC. What did you think you might be doing? It sounds like you became a musician as well. Were you in a band?
I was, yeah. I was touring in bands and whatnot. In fact, I didn't show up for my graduation because I had to. We had shows in Los Angeles, and so I had to take off with the rest of the guys. And I was out the door, and they had to mail it to me. I went to UBC initially. I did history, took history there, but I graduated in film studies. I went to the UBC Film School. I was interested in stories, and I was interested, I know, at that time in movies and cinema and writing and directing, and I thought eventually I would sort of drift into that world. Around that time, and then in the 90s there was, in many ways the Hollywood North sort of era had risen at that point, and they were shooting the X-Files here and Highlander and all those old TV shows and whatnot. But the sort of the prognosis, if you wanted to make your own films and whatnot, that felt like a much different arc. And I thought, geez, I'm not so sure I want to stand out in the rain with a walkie-talkie stopping traffic on the X-Files when they're shooting, and maybe I can do something else. And music was quite immediate, and I had all the, sort of probably the teenage or post-teenage ideas of playing in bands, and the fun of it then. But I toured with a rock band called the Real Mackenzies from '92 up until the late '90s. I did some session work with the Be Good Tanyas, played in a band called the Town Pants for about a decade. Bocephus King, the Hard Rock Miners, all sort of Vancouver indie bands and whatnot. I had friends that sort of had gold records and whatnot, but I never got one. I thought, geez, eventually maybe my destiny is somewhere else. You know, the music's been fun, and for many years, and it paid my rent. I was not, you know, living cheaply, you know, or like that. I was doing fine with it, but even as a teenager, I thought I'd want to get into writing and whatnot, and so the books went that way, and the books sort of eventually brought me to being a guide in some senses in that way as well.
What instrument did you play in the band?
I was sort of the multi-instrumentalist guy off in the corner that played 4 or 5 different things. I was not a genius at music, but I could play those songs that I needed to on those instruments well. So it looked like I was much more talented probably than I was. But I played everything from you know, in the Town Pants, which was very sort of Dubliners, Clancy Brothers style music, sort of amped up. I played mandolin and Irish whistle and harmonica. In Bocephus King, which is a little bit more sort of Tom Waitsy type blues, I played harmonica. I played some percussion things. I did some backup vocals and things like that. It sometimes depended what band I was sitting in with in those years. Yeah.
With the advent of film, the way it's come along now with the smaller cameras, the HD type cameras, GoPros, iPhones, and so on, I'm surprised, besides the writing, you didn't get into a little bit of the filming. Is that something you might do, or are you going to continue to write?
I think I got into doing some music scoring for a while, for doing some films for music. But I didn't really, you know, I thought I would keep sort of, I was trying to sort of move ahead, I think, maybe a little bit. And I kept getting involved with music, and that was sort of paying the way. But eventually I think I sort of thought, especially in the advent of the Penthouse book, which was such a success, you know, most local history books, you know, they sell their first printing out, you know, they did the first printing of that was maybe 3,000 copies. I think it was 2,500, 3,000 copies. That first printing sold so well, it went on to a second and third printing in a hurry that I thought, you know, I thought it was onto something, and I thought it felt very rewarding to write about my own town. I remember reading this old Martin Scorsese interview with Harvey Keitel, the actor, and they talked about how they were making movies in New York, and one of them commented, you know, we were just making movies and really just telling stories about where we lived, and there was a lot of pressure, you know, to at a certain point, are you going to move to Toronto, or are you going to move to New York? And I thought, I'd like to just stay here and create something, or write about some of the myths in Vancouver that way. I mean, to me, it's an interesting place. It's sort of where I'm born and raised, so I probably have some natural fealty, or it's my home team, you know, in that sense. But I thought, you know, reading that interview with them made me think about, yeah, you can tell stories where you're from. You don't always have to, you know, set something, and you know, the most interesting things don't always happen in New York or Los Angeles or London or things like this. There's a lot of stories here that are untold, that our own citizens don't, you know, really know about. So I think it sort of came from that. And in the wake of that Penthouse book, you know, it did well. Everybody, the publisher, who was, of course, now the publishing industry is a little bit interesting. It's a little bit like the movie business in that sense, that as soon as if you have a success, they'll let you do another one. If your movie takes off, you'll probably do another movie. If your book takes off, you'll do another one. So to me, I always thought the story of the Commodore Ballroom would be, no one had written a book about the Commodore. It just seemed like low-hanging fruit, almost in the way that the Penthouse was, because I thought it was just a natural, you know, the arc of the story that had happened there in terms of the Italian family that had presumed to be a crime family connected to, you know, organized crime that had run this bar where all these stars came to. I mean, the fact that no one had written a book in Vancouver about the Penthouse seemed astonishing to me. And equally so with the Penthouse. So in 2014, I sort of undertook one on that, and that became a book, Live at the Commodore, which is more of perhaps a music book in that sense, in terms of the concerts and a lot of, you know, lots of photos and posters and things like that make up the history of the place. But the one thing that's interesting is we sometimes, right in our own city, everybody, Commodore was a fairly well recognized live music venue in town, and everybody fondly remembers it, if for no other reason because it's been around a long time, and our parents and grandparents have been there. which is interesting as well, because there's in a lot of places, there are very few places, and we've done a very good job in Vancouver of bringing in the new, but we haven't done maybe the greatest job of sort of keeping the old. There's very few places in Vancouver that are cross-generational places where your grandparents went to, your parents went to, and you could go to. You can count them on one hand. The P&E, Stanley Park, the Orpheum, oddly enough, the Penthouse, the Commodore. There's very few places, that where it's. And I know the Penthouse seems like a silly addition on that, but when you really think about it, because the city's changed so much there, and no city's supposed to be a museum. It is supposed to change, and we should expect that to change. And I always say that people who wish that Vancouver would have remained as it did in 1974, need to have their head examined. And I can elaborate on that a little bit later. But the idea that there are very few places, the city's changed so much, the definition and the DNA of the city has changed so much with all the development, especially downtown, is really part and parcel in that. Anyway, that Commodore book did very well. It won the BC Book Prize in 2015. I'm happy to say, and it still sells today, and it became a real sort of benchmark. And it also, I think, helped Vancouverites remember or realize how special a bar or a live music venue is. There's not a lot of places that are necessarily. Sometimes the way we gauge our history and the way that the places that we select are. That of historical recognition, people sort of want to look at bigger places or grander places, and I think it became a bit of a landmark idea to do a sort of a history of a venue or of a nightclub, and to show why that's important. Some of the it's interesting that, of course, some of the old railroad barons in town or the people that were involved in founding the city, but you can learn a lot more about who went to its bars and nightclubs about the city than you can who were in its boardrooms, as I always say. So that was that book. And I began to do some of the tours, and being a guide now sort of suddenly kind of showed up at my doorstep because people wanted me to sort of present the book and whatnot. And I began to do some tours of the Commodore, and I still do. It's tougher to get in that room because, well, it's closed right now because of the COVID thing, of course. But when it's busy, when it's open, the concert touring schedule and shows that they're in there all the time, it's sometimes hard to get in there, even during the day, to do a tour because, well, most people have the idea that they show up to see a show there. Doors open at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock and show starts an hour later, and you go, well, the bands are showing up very often, in the case at, noon, 1 o'clock to set up and sound check. So it's not as though the venue's free all the time to do tours. In the case of the Penthouse, the Heritage Vancouver had done a tour of the Penthouse, a walking tour where Danny Filipponi had hosted and showed people around the building. And in the beginning, as he jokes around and when he talks about when he does the tours, in the beginning, he really had no idea what people wanted to know about, or did they want to see the wallpaper, or did they want to see the bar, or what was the stories? And because it was all just normal life to him. But it was interesting because the second floor of the Penthouse, which is a very big building, it's actually a very long building that stretches the block and 2 stories, 3 stories high in a section. The top part of it had been closed, so you were almost sort of felt like you were walking back in time. And because you were hearing these stories straight from somebody who was there, I think that's what the seed of what became the secrets of the Penthouse tours, which still happen today, was so crucial. Oftentimes, and you probably know this maybe as a guide yourself, you're going to a place where something happened once, but there's no evidence of that today. There's a parking lot there now, or there's a totally different building. So you're left to talk about what used to be there or what had happened there. And it's sometimes difficult to ignite the imagination of your guests on that tour so they can understand fully what the stories you're talking about, or it's a bit more of a challenge to bring it to life. It's a totally other thing when you can walk right into that building and touch those walls, be it at the Commodore or be it at the Penthouse, and really experience, what's happened there. And you can stand right in that place yourself and see for yourself.
I would imagine that we might lose some of the existing clubs because of the COVID-19, and they're just going to give up. Or do you see that's a possibility?
Well, I think that's a danger. hey, there's somebody with a book there. Thanks you. Hey, thanks for that. Yeah, there's. I think that's certainly a real danger. At restaurants, cinemas, you're certainly hearing a lot of people worry about that, and I think that's going to be an interesting. That's going to be an interesting. From what I can tell so far, the restaurants actually are sort of leading the way right now and really leading the charge on how, at least, the phrase that this is the new normal. I really hate that. I must say, because I find that it depresses the hell out of everybody into the idea that unfortunately, we're going to have to live like this for the rest of our lives. I don't think that's the case. I know we really have to deal with this for the next little while, but many of my friends, my age, younger, seem like they get very depressed about that concept of this is now the thing. I think, well, actually, once this lifts, we'll be shocked how quickly we go back to some of our old habits, both good and bad, maybe in terms of getting together. But that's certainly a real worry. I mean, there are places that are owned. I mean, the Commodore is owned as a corporation now. Drew Burns, the famous owner of it, who ran the place from the very late 60s until the mid 90s as a single operator. The days of a single owner operator running a bar, a nightclub that big are kind of the way of the past because the costs are so high. Not just in fact, the bands, what you have to pay them, that comes usually out of ticket sales, but essentially, the cost of running a business, the alcohol, the taxes, property taxes. I mean, I think people would be astounded to find out what the rent is at the Commodore for the.
So what kind of corporations want to own a nightclub? Or
no, usually very only large ones. It's a group of owner operators who would own a smaller one and manage it a little. It really depends on every case. One interesting thing that's in terms of the nightclub scene that's coming down the pike is the old Hollywood Theater out in Kiss. Some of you might remember it as a cinema. It was bought by Bonus Development, who actually are the same people that own the Commodore, and they're refurbishing it into essentially a cinema / club, live music club, and very much the same way perhaps the Rio Theater out on Commercial Drive probably is in that same sense where you see that kind of thing. So. And they've been very mindful, sort of trying to respect the history of that place. They've refurbished it and put up a kind of a new neon sign, but they've tried to make it an exact replica of the old one to really remain true to it. So I'm looking forward to seeing. I was in there to have a sneak peek a little while ago, but I think that'll be a really interesting. And there's really nothing like that in that area of town as well. I think that'll be an interesting thing, but. In the wake of that, I'll jump ahead just because I just was going to finish. After the Commodore book, I thought I don't want to get typecast as a barfly here, so I thought I better find some other subject to write about and get outside a little bit. And when I was a kid, I don't know if you folks remember, some of you might have been born and raised here, but in the 1970s, 60s, 70s, really up until in the early 80s, a little while there. I remember the era of sort of the park gangs. People used to talk about, especially on the east side, the Riley Park gang and the Clark Park gang. And they sort of seem like myths in a way because they almost like a boogeyman story. Don't stay out or don't go out in the east van after a certain few hours if you're not from that area of town, or the Clark Parkers are going to get you. And it was sort of this dark, as I say, ghost story that was sort of told, but you never really knew who these people were. In about 1987, I was at a house party when I was a high school student, and some of these guys, it certainly didn't look like they were from Kerrisdale. They had Mac jackets and they looked like East Enders. They showed up and people said it was the Clark Parkers, and they trashed everything. They got into a bunch of fights. I jumped out a back window, and I never forgot it. And as I read some of the stuff in the newspapers about the Clark Parkers, the Clark Park gang, people were talking about them in 1972. I thought, how the hell can this be the same group of people? What is the story here and whatnot? So the Courier was a great outlet. I did an article in 2000 and I think it was about 2009 called Gangs of Vancouver. And it was a very popular story where I got into the history of gangs in Vancouver. And this was just on the cusp of the Olympics when there was, I don't know if you remember that summer or the previous year in 2009, there was quite a number of shootings in not just in Abbotsford and out in Surrey and things like this. They were happening in town for the first time in a while. So, and gang crime, youth young gangs and who were, more sort of geared to drug trafficking and things like that. And these were the violence surrounding that. That became a really newsworthy story. There was a real peak in shootings at that time. So when that article came out, the receptionist at the Courier called me and said, "Hey, there's a guy who said it was a former gang member or a guy, one of these guys in these gangs who wants to talk to you about your article." And I thought, oh God, what have I done? I probably upset somebody here. Who am I? I phoned the number with some trepidation, talked to the guy. His name was Mac Ryan. And this guy, dare I say, he could have been the class clown of sort of the gangs. He was a very easy guy to talk to, great sense of humor. This is the way that he had spent his youth in the 60s and 70s in Vancouver. And he said, "I really liked your article. You really brought a lot of stories." Like, "Oh, I could tell you a bunch of stories if you want." And I just written the article, so I don't really have any purpose to revisit again. But a couple of years later, I thought, God, that story did really well. And I think maybe there's something more to it. I'd heard a few more things. I'd done a bit more research just in passing and thought it would be interesting to tackle that. So I guess it was 2017, I did this book called The Last Gang in Town, which is the epic story of the Vancouver Police versus the Clark Park Gang, which centers around the events in 1972 that touched off at the Rolling Stones concert at the Pacific Coliseum, where there was a riot that year that the police blamed on the Clark Park Gang. I had found, some CBC archival material, city archives material, interviewed some people that were there. Now that I had access, in the article, I only talked to people who lived in East Vancouver and some of the police. I talked to Chief Jim Chu, chief of police at the time. But the only thing I didn't have was gang members on it. And thanks to Mac, suddenly I had access to some of his friends that hear their side of the story, as well as I had gotten, thanks to the Penthouse book, some of the people in the Vancouver Police Department, older sort of veterans, detectives and whatnot, had began to trust me a little bit better, or they saw what I did with their stories. I didn't necessarily make it look bad. I told it pretty fairly. So my name began to get around as an okay person to talk to. He wasn't a reporter that was looking for a gotcha moment or something like this. And that helped. And I got a lot of, I spoke to some members that were on what happened was in the wake of that riot at the Coliseum, there was a secret gang task force that was put together by the Vancouver Police Department that the media didn't know about it. Many other people in the department didn't know about it. The Justice Minister didn't know about it, but it was kept very secret. And they were basically entrusted to go into Clark Park, which is up by Commercial and 14th, where the gang kind of hung out, and go after them. They went in plainclothes. They would come in with bats. They had their guns and flashlights, but they didn't show any badges. They just showed up and tried to clean house. And what happened in 1972, as I dug further, there was a bit of a gang war between the Vancouver Police Department and some of these East Vancouver street gangs at the time. So this story had never really been told before, and I managed to get some unpublished documents. I managed to get, there were lots of sort of great Hollywood moments where, somebody would show me a report of a wiretap of phones that had been done by the police department, and said, "Well, I can't show you that, Aaron, but I've got to make a phone call in the next room for a minute." So, and I would say stupidly, like a turnip that just fell off the back of a truck, "Oh, should I go, or are we done?" And he goes, "No, Aaron, I have to go to the next room to make a phone call." And I realized what he was saying. And as soon as he left, like a James Bond spy, I was taking up my phone and taking pictures of the pages of this thing that I could look at later. So, and I walked out of that thinking, was he doing that just for my benefit, or he was, it was it's quite exciting, and reciprocally as well. There was sometimes some weird stuff as I realized that in some of the old gang members in their youth in this story went on to become Hell's Angels in the story. At one point, I got a phone call from the boys that ride motorcycles for a living, who wanted to know exactly what I wanted to know about. And that became a very interesting phone call. Maybe that's a story for another day or whatnot, but we worked it out, thankfully. And they were actually quite interested to read it. The funny thing was, when the book came out that Christmas, I heard from all the old retired police that I'd talked to, and said, hey, and they said, geez, everybody got the book for Christmas and everybody liked it. So you did a good job. And I thought, well, good. I'm glad we're still friends here and whatnot. And then I got a call from the Clark Parkers, the old Clark Park gang people. And they say, every Hell's Angel got the book every Hell's Angel in BC got the book for Christmas, and they all liked it. I'm getting phone calls from guys I haven't heard from a while. So somehow I managed to steer that boat through the ice field, and didn't manage to get hurt from it like I thought. I was maybe in danger to at one time. That book did really well, and that's that just got optioned for a TV series. So I don't know now. They're just as soon as it got optioned, all this virus stuff happened. So they haven't really been able to showcase their concept for the film or the TV series around, but it's something that we're hoping to pick up maybe once that goes on. Now I didn't do any guided tours with the gang. I thought about it, and it might be something I pick up in the future here, because a lot of people ask me about it. Are you going to do be great to. I did. There was one event at the Vancouver Museum I did where I brought out some of the old Gang Squad guys, as well as some of the old Clark Parkers, sort of together on stage for the first time to, answer questions. And they all were sort of shaking hands and sort of patting each other on the back, like the old cartoon of the sheepdog and the wolf. There was just a job they had to do, but they respect each other now and whatnot. So that was an interesting development in all that. But through this period, I continued to do some tours at the Commodore and at the Penthouse, and in many cases, some of the things I like to try and implement that I don't know maybe is information that's helpful for you folks as well in terms of your work as guides. Sometimes at the top of a tour, I would try and explain very roughly what we're going to see here and what we're going to do, because you don't have to give it all away, but I always sometimes feel that just giving people a little benchmarks of an idea so they know where they're at in terms of the tour. I feel like I'm at the beginning. I feel like I'm about 3/4 of the way through, because he mentioned he was going to get to this, or she mentioned he was going to get to that. Sometimes I find that helpful. But as I say, I've been fortunate, and I've really sought out places that there are places you can still go to, like the Commodore or the Penthouse, where you're walking into the space exactly where that happened. And it's so much of an easier and a more captivating sell to tell that story if you're in a place where that happens. So sometimes picking, the stories you pick may not have those places, but the really great ones, do. Oddly enough, in this, I should actually say here, that tour which we do with Danny Filipponi, a retired major crimes detective named Grant McDonald, who once investigated and used to arrest Danny's dad and uncles, and myself do these tours, and we take people around and tell some stories of what happened at the Penthouse and whatnot. And just last year, I'm very happy to say, I took this down from the wall to show you, the City of Vancouver gave us a City of Vancouver Heritage Award. City of Vancouver, through the Vancouver Heritage Commission, wishes to recognize and honor special projects and accomplishments in the field of heritage conservation. And the honor is given in accordance to the Forbidden Vancouver walking tours. And Forbidden Vancouver is a company that you might be familiar with. They host the tours and handle our ticketing and organize it and stuff like that. But it's very much, so we got a nice award there for show, our tour that we do. And we do it maybe 6 or 7 times a year. We don't do it a lot. We don't do it weekly. It's tough sometimes to get everybody together to do it, because between Danny and Grant, they have busy schedules. I do too. But we try, and it's fun when we get together and do it. And in the back of Liquor Less Than the Law, there's some old Italian recipes from Grandma Filipponi. You can make the very kind of spaghetti that she used to make for the family. We put that recipe in the book, and of course we thought, well, why don't we serve it? So you get the tour. Then at the very end, you get a big spaghetti dinner, and everybody kind of sits around and we can chat a little bit of that. And so it became kind of word got out. It became a really good night out, and people from all ages. And it was interesting because it wasn't necessarily tourists that were taking that tour. It was people from Vancouver. They wanted to learn a little bit more about their own city, or had wondered about what the hell goes on in that weird little building on Seymour Street. And you know, it always starts off with a joke because people who say they've never been here and you know, and they get, oh, Mr. Johnson, nice to see you again. You know, like there's always that kind of sort of play that you can kind of have fun with at the beginning of it. But that's you know, that was and I'm really pleased. You know, one thing that happened because of all that, I think, because from the book and from the tours, I think people got a really better appreciation of what was happening there. Yes, there was that criminal element that used to hang out there. There was that prostitution problem that became a serious thing in the 1970s. But really, the full story of the Penthouse was a lot more than that. How they individually played a role in how our liquor laws were changed that opened up some of the liquor licenses and whatnot, as well as you know, some of the social mores of the city, because they were very good at some of the hosting some of the African American jazz performers that you know, and whatnot. There were so many different stories. And at one point, one of the members of the Filipponi family came up to me and said, you know, I used to, when I used to meet people, I would never tell people my last name, because when you said you were a Filipponi in Vancouver, some people would, oh, well, nice to meet you, and walk away, you know, or get away from. And she says, I don't do that anymore. And that was such a wonderful thing to hear. I mean, you write these stories, you try and be, you know, you're not biased or anything like that. But when you get feedback like that, and that some people, as a result of something you've done, have heard a bigger story about the, you know, that they now have reappraised what they once thought was their idea of it. I mean, there's no better praise you can get than that, really, in terms of how it goes. So,
is there any connection with the Commodore bowling lanes? I mean, obviously the name is the same, but is that one place where some of the old gangs are? My other quick question is, so I guess it kind of goes without saying, but were the Filipponis somewhat connected with a local mob, or is that just a myth?
Well, there's two questions there. First of all, the Commodore lanes, that's the bowling alley, of course, it's underneath the Commodore. What happened is that it's interesting that the Rifle family, you might know of the Rifle Bird Conservatory up by West Ham Island, south of Richmond there. The Rifles made their money in alcohol, in brewing. They were brewers. They ran brewery operations in Canada before the 1920s. You know, but interesting enough, when Prohibition came in the United States, while very nice Italian businessmen in Chicago, like Al Capone and things like this, were involved in the Seagram's family on the East Coast. Well, the Rifle family out here in the West Coast was sending alcohol down through the States, down through on the West Coast. And they made millions of dollars in the 1920s. In fact, they basically paid for the Commodore in cash, with a briefcase of cash showing up, and as well as their homes, the Casamia home out, their big mansion and whatnot, still around. So what is an interesting story with the Rifles, that George Rifle and his wife were at the Hotel Vancouver ballroom. That's the second hotel, not the one that we still there today. And it was there was a dance hall up there, and it was very busy. And George's wife said to him, you know, George, you've got to build your own place. This is just too crowded. You know, here's the one percenters of the 1920s. You know, and said, you know, and he said, you know, that's a good idea. You know, and so he found that lot on Granville, 800 block of Granville, which just used to be 2-story businesses, ground floor business, something above, and it basically bought that whole section. The Orpheum had already been built in 1926, but in 1929. And about 28, he looked into buying it. In 29, they started building it in 29. And even though that the Depression came through, it didn't really affect business of the Commodore. Right afterwards, they closed for a couple months just to reorder. But the idea was that they were it was sort of an entertainment complex, that there would be this dance hall up on the second floor. There'd be retail on the first floor. It would sort of keep people coming in and out of there. And a bowling alley underneath. And there were quite a few bowling alleys, actually. There were a lot of bowling alleys in downtown Vancouver through those years. That one is sort of the last one left. And it's a beautiful, large bowling alley space. If you've never been in there, treat yourself and go check it out sometime. As for the question about the Filipponis, well, you know, you had a situation where Mickey Filipponi used to take a few sports bets. If you wanted to bet on something, he'd take that bet for you. If you needed some money and you couldn't go to a bank, you could go to talk to Joe Filipponi, and you wouldn't need all the paperwork that would be required, and there'd be a slightly higher interest rate. You know, there was some alcohol when you liquor stores were not available, open at that time of night. You could show up there, or even better, call one of their cabs from Diamond Cabs, the Filipponi cab company, and the cab would shoot the bottle over to you. So were they involved in a little bit of criminal activity? Yes, they were. Now, were they murdering people or knocking people off or doing intimidation or racketeering or protection? No, they weren't, frankly. But you know, back then, they sort of danced that halfway line. And if perhaps some supplier, or they had a problem with a customer, I think very often they sort of showed that card to say, do you know who we are? You know, we're the Filipponi, you know, you're going to pay us. You're going to pay your bill, sir. You're not going to walk out of the bar here. Well, there's going to be problems. Or as in the case of when Louis Armstrong came to Vancouver and couldn't get a room at the Hotel Vancouver because he was African-American. They didn't allow black people to get hotels in Vancouver at the time. It was people like the Filipponis who would call over and say, listen, you're going to give our friend Louis a room, and there's going to be problems here. Do you know who we are? And they would, you know, God knows if they ever got called on it, they might have to say, what do we do now? They didn't necessarily have a muscle, you know, like in the family to do that. But they would sort of put their foot down and things like that. And I think that they played into it a little bit, you know, like a little, but they certainly, what was interesting is really that they made the bar a very welcome space for some people who were legitimately part of Vancouver organized crime at the time, because they were good for business. You know, they came in and spent a lot of money. As we say in the tours nowadays, if that happened, the gang squad would be in there to say, you guys are all out, because nowadays the shootings happen sometimes right in those places. They don't wait. You know, back in the day, the people that hung out there, some of them were gentlemen about it. They would pick you up in a car and take you down to the Fraser River and shoot you down there, and at least do it with your kids around. But so it was, you know, a bit of a different era. But the Filipponi sort of always kind of straddled that line a bit. And, you know, their reputation probably paid for it in that sense. But were they involved in half the things that you know, the city police thought they were? No, there's no evidence of that. In fact,
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do any of our members, do you have any quick questions? We're getting near the end of the hour.
We're getting to the end. I'll just say very quickly, this is my latest book called Vancouver After Dark. And it sort of picks up after the Commodore and the Penthouse books in a way, because it follows, while as the Penthouse book and the Commodore book are about places that are still here, this is a book about the nightclubs like the Cave or Izzy's or Richards on Richards or the Town Pump that are no longer around in Vancouver, and maybe why they and the book talks about a little bit about how they disappeared, why they disappeared, some of the people that were involved in running them, and it's a full color book with lots of photographs and posters that have never been published or seen before, and I'm very proud of it. And it has been nominated for a BC Book Prize this year. I don't know if we'll win because it's in September, but that's the latest one, in case you want to check that one out. So,
well, what are you working on? What do you think you're working on next, possibly, or are you allowed to say?
Yeah, I can. I'm as a result of the gang book. Some of the police that worked on the Vancouver Vice Squad in the late 1970s and early 80s became a little bit more comfortable to talk to me, and some of them I don't think maybe had read a book since maybe a Louis L'Amour novel, you know, years before, and but they've had some fascinating stories about you know, one thing about police is they can go into some of those places that we can't, or sometimes we're forced to, and what they saw from their bird's eye view of the city is totally different from what any other person saw in the city, and they have a real different definition of Vancouver at certain places and certain times and certain people. And if you can tap into some of those memories and get them comfortable enough to talk to you, you hear the most amazing stories you've ever heard. So you wouldn't even believe this would have happened in Vancouver. So I've been doing a bunch of interviews for that and progressing along with that. I think that'll probably be the next book, but I don't want to say for sure yet, because sometimes you get excited about something and then the steam runs out of it. But I keep thinking I keep sort of waiting for that to happen. In this case, it doesn't. These guys are just telling me the most amazing stories from what they saw on the job, and a lot of maybe some stories that made the news but didn't fully come out, or maybe the right people never really went to jail for it. So I think it could be quite sensational and quite exciting when it's all said and done.
Oh, all right. Well, does anyone have a fast question or two? And by the way, we don't have to end this right at 12 noon. If you want to stay on, folks, a little longer, we can. Of course, most of us aren't going anywhere. The day looks nice enough outside, but you know what? You've been outside, so stay a little longer.
Yeah.
So anyone at all have?
I believe Jim Curry has a question. He's had his hand up for a little bit as well.
Jim Curry, are you still there, Jim Curry?
Or not?
He may have faded off.
On my end of things anyway, I met Aaron a couple of times at a couple of different things. One of them was the photo album of the surveillance photos that the VP
yes,
at the Penthouse that was done at the police museum. I got introduced to you via Will Woods at Fort Bean, Vancouver, and then and had done the Penthouse tour with you. I guess it was the November one, I think is when it was, with Danny and them. It was just before the book launch there that night. So thanks for coming on. It was great. Always love listening and hearing that. I will just a general comment to anybody that hasn't done the Penthouse tour. It is well worth every dollar and every bit of time spent there with everybody chatting. There's just a lot of stuff. It's by far and away the most interesting building in the city of at least downtown Vancouver, as far as I can tell. Well worth it. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Matthew. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Stay with us if you like, Aaron. No problem.
Yeah.
Speaking of downtown Vancouver, it looks like that'll be our guest speaker for next week. Is one of the people with the downtown. I want to say Vancouver Improvement thing, but I think it's got a different name. Anyways, we're working on that one. So that'll be next Tuesday, which is May 12th at 11 a.m. Now, just for the members, so you know, I was on a webinar yesterday, and they were trying to gather information from tour guides and drivers around the United States, Canada, even around the world. And the thing that stuck out in my mind mostly is what are companies, tour operators going to do to encourage people to take tours and make them feel safe? And for that matter, bus companies. Now, you guys that do long distance tours, are we going to have to show up with masks and gloves? Will the bus company have that for us in case passengers want one for some reason, or what have you? And tour companies, what happens if you're on tour and the customer has agreed before he left home to comply with the protocols on the tour, social distancing as best they can, this kind of thing, and then they don't participate? Or what happens if someone gets sick on the tour? And we're not sure if it's COVID-19 or what it might be. Anyway, just in general, do you guys have any thoughts and concerns that you'd like to bring up? Questions you have about, I guess, this year, next year?
It's just as if you turn to later.
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry. I wanted just to make a comment to Aaron.
He's still there. Go ahead.
Oh, right. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to say that CTGA, we came out on your Penthouse tour, and I still remember the meatballs and the talk, and it was such a great time. And I'm so glad to see you here. And I've noticed, of course, that you've written a couple more books, and very excited. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Marlene. Thank you. Yeah, glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, from my point of view, first about my tours, they actually got canceled into September, multi-days tours. And I was still planning to give away masks, basically, and having in my little minibus, basically, and sanitizer probably. You're going to plan for it. So I got still a couple months of time. But to Aaron, I'm not sure if I read your article in Vancouver Sun some years back about the Filipponi. And I still have the Vancouver Sun delivered every morning, actually, because that's where I get my history out of it. But the other thing is, I think probably the Penthouse should be also get as historic site building protected. I mean, if the Waldorf is a historic building, why shouldn't the adjective penthouse be?
Sure. Yeah. Or the Commodore.
It's
Or
just the background.
yeah. It's funny in terms of it almost is on a de facto location on the Heritage Register. The family, the one thing that makes it isn't is there actually has been a lot of changes in the inside. It's not as though there are a couple of specific corners, that really haven't undergone change, but they've redecorated, so they've probably broken a few strict heritage rules about that don't make it an exact that don't qualify it as an exact heritage business in that sense, or heritage, but it almost is in any other sense of the word. Same thing with the Commodore. The Commodore, the outside of the building hasn't changed at all, really. I mean, like the penthouse has been painted in a lot of different colors, but it's essentially the same building if you stood outside there in the early 1940s or late 1930s, as you would at the Commodore up front, on Granville Street. All that brick is original. So that's, it's coming up very close to 100 years old now. But the one thing that you hear from the people who own these businesses is that if you suddenly do get declared a national historical site in Canada, or you're put on the Heritage Register, it really constricts what you can do as a business in terms if you want to sometimes have to remodel or renovate a little bit, even within the natural course of business, that you're not ruining the business and whatnot. So they tend to, and I understand why they do it, because it kind of handcuffs them to certain things they want to do. And in the case of, the future of the penthouse is a question that I get into in the latest version of the book, because Danny Filipponi has developers offering him dump trucks of money to sell that building. And they own that building and the house next door, that residential home. That's one of the oldest registered homes in downtown Yaletown South anymore. It's probably the last of its kind in that sense. In that area, Seymour Street in downtown Vancouver in the 50s and 60s used to have tons of those kind of homes. They're almost all gone now. So the land, is worth a fortune. But the problem is the building as well was never really built to last as long as everybody's expected. No one thought the penthouse would be there for 70, 75 years. So, they're a little bit resistant to, because they want to make sure the penthouse is there. Danny has two sons now who have expressed interest in the bar, where there could be a third generation of Filipponis running that bar, which would be quite wonderful as the monarchy turns to another generation. But they're also a little worried about, what they know they're going to have to remodel or they're going to have to renovate, because anytime there's a good rainfall at the penthouse, believe me, that roof is not in the greatest condition. Or is it earthquake proof? So I wouldn't be surprised if, Danny may do a deal to sell the land where the house is and be able to rebuild, up with the penthouse, keeping everything that it's about, maybe even making it a little bit bigger. So because while exotic dancing kind of pays the bills at the penthouse, he does stuff for the jazz festival, the comedy festival. He would love to have a bigger stage to accommodate different kinds of live events, so the penthouse is still going to be there, I think, on Seymour Street. Will the building have maybe a different shape to it? I wouldn't be surprised. And I'd hate to see that old relic go, but I also would like to see that, for which it stands for, be able to exist a few decades into the future.
Well, do they own that parking lot beside it?
They don't own the lot. What they own is the penthouse, the land itself, and the house next door. And you can visit the BC Assessment website and type in those addresses and see how many millions of dollars those are worth. Amicon, the developing company, has that parking lot. They own the parking lot, and they own the building just south, the lot south of the penthouse. So in the way, the penthouse is the keystone of that whole block. And believe me, Amicon would love to develop a building there. And at one point, Danny was shown blueprints saying, "Listen, we can take down the house, we can take down the penthouse, we can demolish the block and put up a whole new condo building, and on the top, we'll put the penthouse, a brand new penthouse." Until Danny said, nobody comes to the penthouse to look for the view outside the building. What they come to look at in the penthouse is totally different than the inside, So that, but he's shown blueprints like that all the time, and right now he's holding on. The business is up until all this happened has never been better. Actually, there's a whole new generation of people that come there after the hockey game, or beforehand, or it's just a different. It has a much different vibe than any other kind of bar its kind in downtown Vancouver, and there's, I'm not in there as much as anybody believes that people think I'm in there every night, but the times I've been there, I've never seen a fight in the place. It's a pretty casual, pretty easygoing atmosphere. So it's more power to them, and I hope the Penthouse is around for a lot longer. To mention something very quickly, Jeff, if we were going to segue, if anybody has any questions about the books or some of the tours or anything like that, I'm happy to answer them. Stick around. In terms of what you're talking about, in terms of what's the future of how tours are going to go in this next while, the people I've talked to, it's interesting how the restaurant business seems to be sort of really pushing that curve right now, or really trying to innovate some way that they can do business with people getting together again and whatnot. The one thing that I find a bit troubling is that it's going to take, once even some of these restrictions lift, it's going to take a while for people, to have some expendable income in which to do some of these kind of tours that we all do, or buy the books or what have you. But in terms of the tourist business, that feels like we're a ways away from that. I mean, I don't know any other business, aside from some of the bar and hospitality businesses and some of the local tour guide businesses that we do that are hurt more by this. Maybe the cruise ship business is maybe the only one that's
it's hurt a lot more.
Yeah,
it's hurt bad.
Yeah, so I'm worried that even once these restrictions lift and we're able to kind of nudge around a little bit more together again, it's going to take a while for people in town to have a little bit of money to be involved in some things to do. But secondly, when those American or overseas tourists are going to come back, depending on some of the kind of tours you do, I mean, it's interesting. Most often the tours that I do are actually two Vancouverites who have taken interest in city history. But some of the tours you may do may involve much more tourists, and it feels like that's a bit of a ways yet to come back. That we may have to sit
yes
around.
And no.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on the market segment, right? Like right
Yes.
now we're talking to our clients. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
I can't find to put up your hand button here, but I don't know how to do that.
Okay.
But actually, first, Aaron, my name's Alistair. I run a company called Rockwood Adventures. I don't know if you know Manfred Schullerman, who's run it for years, but I still work with him. But anyways, fascinating stuff you were doing. Thanks so much for sharing all that with us. But onto your comment, Jeff, if you want, about our experience right now, it very much depends, of course, on the market segment. Cruise, gone, right? We'll see what happens with the repositionings in September, October, and I'm just sending a note to Princess right now about that. They've canceled everything right up to end of August, every ship, but they've left some shifts in place. They haven't canceled certain ones. They're showing up I still have bookings for them into September and October for Princess, not Holland America. So and Holland America is only running that one ship for the rest of the summer, right?
I saw something on the Facebook, I think this morning, that some other cruise line announced that they were going to pretty much either give up on the whole Alaska season completely, or at least until end of August. I was just going to say, I think cruise ships don't want to run up here or to Vancouver, Alaska this summer. And then I realized, no, wait a minute, they won't want to run in the Caribbean and some of the usual places they go in the summer. It's way too hot. They might want to try to come back here.
Right now, the issue is they can't do the cross-border. So all of the stuff's out. So they're running out of Seattle, like Holland America Group, which is Princess, Holland America, and Seabourn, are running out of Seattle instead. So they don't have to, and just keeping that, and they have only one ship coming out of Vancouver to service the Canadian market, I think. But I don't know what happens when they hit Alaska, because right now it's only essential travel. So people are hesitant to book. So they're not getting any bookings probably, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's one segment. And I think, optimistic if anything happens by the fall. But we'll see for 2021. We'll see what happens with the next wave of COVID and how that's going to impact. We'll see what happens with vaccines. We'll see who knows with all those things, treatment, and the patience that the general public has for the economy, and versus the health of elderly and vulnerable people, right? But anyways, so that's one segment, but the high-end leisure market is going to come back, I think, pretty fast. We already have bookings in July. And, unless something prevents them from coming, they want to come.
That's right.
Interesting enough, in discussions with our clients about that, the discussion lies around, like, we put together this whole package I sent out to a lot of our clients. We branded it at a Steri tour and transfer service for them. That's not a customer forward branding statement, of Steri tour and service, but it's that kind of thing. And the challenge with it is that, it looks like the standards will be pretty low. My gut is it's probably going to still be one initially in BC that they're going to want to partition, probably. So TransLink's moving forward. I've been talking to TransLink. We talked exactly what they're doing. They're putting in vinyl into all their darts and smaller vehicles and plexiglass into the big buses, shields, basically. And so that's probably a minimum standard in a vehicle. Some of the guys like Imperial and stuff, they're removing a row of seats, I understand, and some of those people, and think that might be sufficient. But right now, because there's no published standard on tour operators, I just saw one in Ontario for hotels, but not for tour businesses and transportation buses and stuff like that. But that's my gut. And then the interesting part was, though, that more than one of my clients commented that, you know what, when our guys start traveling again, they don't want they won't want masks, he thinks. And I said, well, they're probably going to have to use masks here initially, in close quarters. I bet that's where Henry will go with it. Maybe not, maybe it won't be mandated, but we'll see. But they're saying that a lot of the market they want to come and have a fun holiday, and they don't want all these restraints and restrictions and whatever.
Yeah, there was a story on Global BC last night about a company in Surrey that you can wear a regular ball cap, and they've created a plexiglass thing that'll just clip onto the bill, and it comes down at and it's all open down here. But at least if there's an inadvertent spray coming out of your mouth, that's just going to hit your mask. That's the kind of mask I would wear right now if I had one. I think we're going to see masks from the guests, whether it's the one I described or that one.
Or it might be a driver requirement, actually.
Yeah.
Also.
We're all definitely going to be seeing plexiglass, a lot more of it at all the stores we go to, and on the buses, probably on the tour buses. Any other comments or questions, anybody, about any topic?
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
So what's the latest? What's happening with your repairs on your car?
Who you talking to, Jim? Joanne Burrows, go ahead. Joanne Burrows.
I was just going to say a big part of the thing, too, that I noticed is everyone's talking about, are we going to have masks and shields and stuff? But one of the things I was talking to, not specifically to tour operators, but to a lot of other businesses, restaurants and stuff too, isn't just around that, but it's around, if you're going to have that stuff, you might as well maintaining it properly, why you're doing it, how it's effective, how it's not effective. And the biggest thing from my working in healthcare was donning and doffing is your biggest concern. Like, I've seen people wearing them and they have their gloves on and they have their mask on, and then they stick their hand underneath their mask and scratch their nose. It's educating people on how to wear this stuff appropriately and how to use it. And the biggest risk isn't wearing it, but it's when you put it on and take it off, and training people to use it effectively. And a lot of head scratching has been going on around that as well.
Well, that's a great point. It wasn't brought up in that webinar I was on yesterday. I'd be interested if between this week and next week, any of our members, if you're still able to, and you work for a big company like Colette Tours or JAC or Jeanview or whoever, why don't you send off an email to whoever your supervisor was, or maybe the supervisor above them, if you have their address, and just say, hey, what are you guys thinking along the lines of, in the future, offering the guests? Are you going to offer them masks, these face shield type masks, other masks? Or, do you have any, have you started to formalize any plans that you can share with us now? Because we still want to work in this industry, but we want to be protected as well. When I get on, when I go to the airport to meet someone, or the cruise ship terminal, hopefully they don't have any kind of a cold or COVID-19 or anything like that. How do you know, right? We got to protect ourselves. So I'd be interested if people want to write an email in the coming few days and see if you get a response. And if you're allowed to share that response with us, that would be great. Is there any way to, an astronaut knows when he goes into space, if he's got to scratch his nose, it ain't going to happen. I can still reach under that mask and do that. And yeah, that's a big issue. Tough to stop that. Any comments, anybody?
You're going to see some pushback on the masks because what did I just see last night? The Costco down in the States. And that's a fairly well-off clientele for the most part. And there's a hashtag going on Twitter saying, boycott Costco, because Costco US is mandating masks for everybody coming into their stores.
I think that's a brilliant idea, and people, that pushback, I don't understand it. It's like, oh my God, they're doing it for your protection.
None of us are going to understand the American mindset, though, of me,
yeah, but
for so many of those things. And they're going to want to go away to get away from all of this, and then they come to a country where we do have that mandate. Masks are just not going to be accepted by the majority of those travelers, I'd imagine. I don't think we're going to have to worry about masks at all. I just don't think we're going to see people coming across borders and traveling myself, and from what I've said, until there's a vaccine, in which case the mask is going to be a moot point.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but who here is going to be comfortable in the next 5 or 6 months with no changes, in vaccination aspects of it, with having American clients on board?
Yeah,
because of the amount that they've got in that, it's going to be really awkward, even with certain things.
Yeah. Interestingly, it seems to be only a thing in the U.S. The Europeans seem much more aware and open to those kinds of restrictions or new procedures or whatever. And I'm wondering about because such a huge part of our tourism industry comes from the U.S.
The U.S. and China, and the two, initially, the initial outbreak and then the most affected. It's going to be very difficult, I think, for a lot of people just getting across borders, but for a lot of people to be comfortable having that many coming into the enclosed spaces that are there. I mean, it's going to be difficult. Yeah, the high-end market's going to be able to afford to come back, I think, beforehand. But
on another issue to do with group tours is, for example, at the tracks or charter bus lines or Cantrail coach, are the drivers going to be expected, as each time the group gets off the bus, to have Sani wipes or what have you, clean the steering wheel, the handrails, the seat rails?
It's not going to be hand wipes. It's going to be companies are going to have to provide the larger industrial vaporizers, the hydrogen peroxide sanitizers that are going to have to be done on a more regular basis.
And will the bus company still allow passengers to use the bathroom on those buses that have a bathroom?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Has anybody looked into insurance? Because if the people from the United States can't get insurance, health insurance up here because of COVID-19, they can't come anyway.
It's not going to be just the U.S. It's going to be everyone in general. Everyone's going to be hesitant to cross borders if they're, because they're not going to get insurance to cover them.
They'll get insurance, it just won't cover pandemic. They'll still get travel insurance. It'll have an out clause. They're not good.
Right.
The travel insurance companies don't want to walk away from their whole market.
But
they're going to still sell travel insurance. It'll just have a pandemic out clause.
But the insurance companies at the same time aren't in the habit of giving money out either. Like they just may blanket say, well, we're not going to cover any traveling sort of thing. So
until the board-
One of the things that came up yesterday is, will the tour operators ask the passengers before they leave home to sign a liability waiver? If you get sick on that tour you're taking, you're not going to blame us for it.
Those waivers don't matter anyway. If you talk to a lawyer, they don't count.
Which jurisdiction was it signed in? Where is it going to apply for? Am I going to? We know that the American population is quite litigious in the first place, and it's if there's a way to get around it, or to assign blame to someone else, it will be found. It will be difficult to balance that.
Well, as long as your waiver is jurisdictions in BC, then BC law will apply. And even the cruise ships allow you to do your jurisdiction in BC. So your waivers will be evaluated under BC jurisdictional law, not US.
So question for everyone here then, who here has never bothered with a waiver for their tours before, or who here does have waivers?
We always use waivers.
Anyone else?
I think the waiver.
Fatima, you're muted. You have to hit the little blue button on your picture there, and then you won't be muted.
Yeah, sorry. One thing that really concerns me is the policies and procedures in the attractions, like Capilano, Grouse Mountain, Columbia Icefield. They're packed of people. And what would be now the procedure? How long that's gonna take to get a group to visit this kind of stuff? Would be incredible.
Yeah, that's a great point. The more time it's going to be, the more space and the fewer people we have to onboard, the more money it's going to cost everybody to operate all of these things. There's going to be fewer people available with that money to be able to do these trips for the next little bit.
Even the time actually, because we are allowed so in to visit the attraction like a certain amount of time with the lineups and everything, like all the new procedures, that would be double the time almost.
Yeah, one of the things that came up yesterday was, will we have to show up? Like, Capilano the last couple of years has been trying to get the groups to show up at a certain time, but I discovered when I got there, they didn't really seem to care. Okay, you're here, give me your money, in you go, and thanks. But that may not only change, but for restaurants, if you're supposed to be at a restaurant at a certain time, is that going to be more critical, because they want you in and out of there in 30 or 40 minutes because they got another group that's due in at the moment you leave. So we may find some scheduling issues that are tighter than they were, at least until the vaccine, hopefully, that comes along will come along.
Yeah,
it's all going to be more time and more money, which is going to be passed on. Either the sanitation required by activity providers, transport providers is going to take more money, and then more time to do, which is going to be passed on to everything else. And it's not going to be, whether they're coming internationally or domestic. That's going to limit a lot of people's choices about whether or not they're going to take a tour or not. They may just see attractions picking up. You may have Capilano doing well, but it's because of locals and people traveling within Canada, but they're transporting and going on their own.
Well, one thing that some of the tour companies, tour operators and such are going to try to do, at least in the beginning and possibly for late in the summer, offer seat sales, incentives, reduced rates. Even Capilano might lower the cost of their entrance fee just to get people back inside. It's going to be interesting. Does anyone know? I know we've seen on the Facebook pages about Butcher Gardens reopening, but I didn't get a chance to check. What are they charging to get in there? Now, their usual May price is one thing, but it moves up. Moves up the ladder a little bit as the season wears on. But I'm wondering if for now it's a reduced rate. Trying to encourage people to come in. One thing I didn't like when one thing I didn't like when I read that stuff on Butcher Gardens is that the only washrooms that are open is one in the area of the bus lot and one in the area of the car lot. If I'm halfway around that garden near the carousel, and I have the urge to want to go to the washroom, that's a long way to walk back. I'm surprised they can't keep a staff person on. And one of my thoughts about the bathroom would be on the bus is, okay, you can use the bathroom, and then the bathroom can't be used again until the driver goes in there and, does whatever he can do to clean it real quick.
Which means that every 10 minutes they've got to stop while doing a trip and then do a sanitizing. It's going to be real difficult for.
No, it would have to be just one use. Would have to be one use between points A and B, and then at B the driver would have to clean it. Now someone else can use it, but I don't know.
Conversely, have anyone heard from other tour operators about anything in regards to the products they're looking at offering? 1-day trips versus multi-day trips. You may have to start small. You don't have to use the bathroom if you're stopping every hour or two on a local 1-day trip versus not being able to do a trip to Kelowna or further abroad for a few days. Anyone heard anything?
No, not right now.
Just as a little aside with the Bouchard Gardens, there's nothing other than the rates are the same. They're open, and it's $26 for an adult.
Wow.
Until 15, and then it goes up to the summer rate of $35 on after that. So,
while you're on the internet there, Matthew, go read what it says, if anything, on the Capilano Suspension Bridge. They must be dying to open the gate to let people in.
I know Van Dusen has done it too, and they're restricting the number of people at a time in the garden, and they have staff within the garden enforcing the physical distancing rules.
There's nothing on the Capilano Bridge site other than the letter dated April 16th that they will be closed until further notice.
All right, folks, 12:30 at the moment. Any last comments or questions about anything? Alistair is leaving us, so thanks to him. We still have approximately 24. We got the full complement on. Eddie, what do you got to say there, Eddie?
How you doing, buddy? I thought it was a great meeting today. That was a great talk and very interesting. It's nice to feel like we're back at work, even if it's it's just a mirage of that. But it's nice to get back. It feels good to be talking to the group, the people that we know. It's just it's times like this. I think it's good for all of us, our mental well-being, and as well as how we're gonna move forward from this as well. So this is fantastic. I think thank you, both you and Matthew, for putting this together. I know you guys have kind of led the way on this, and so it's greatly appreciated. I'm sure it's appreciated by everybody in Vancouver as well from our CTGA group. So thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. No problem.
Yeah, Jeff, only quick. Aaron is gone. How and where can we find out when he's doing his tours?
Oh, Aaron, we should have. I don't know if Aaron's still on board, but
he's gone.
He slipped out a little while ago.
No worries. I meant to ask him that, so I can send him an email and ask him that, or a text actually, and Renzo, I'll get back to you on that. Yeah.
Just so everyone knows, I'll send a link into the group. His publisher, arsenalpulp.com, currently has a 25% off sale, promo code Stay Home, for all of their books. So if you're looking to buy any of Aaron's books, Clark Park, Alaska Hanging Town, Live of the Commodore, this one, Vancouver After Dark, or Liquor, Lust, and the Law, they're 25% off on arsenalpulp.com. I'll put a link in the
Arsenal Pulp, P-U-L-P?
Yeah, I'm going to put a link in the chat right now so everyone can
Perfect.
access
Here,
it.
I have an interesting question and a comment about my unfortunate ability to get any luck with Service Canada at EI. But first I'll ask, those of you that have applied for the emergency relief, have some of you gotten it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So here's what happened here. Now, I applied back on March 20th or so, which was later the government said if you applied after March 15th for regular EI, you will just fall into the emergency benefit there, CERB, I think it's called. So yesterday, I think it was, I got a phone call finally from EI, who were all concerned about my work in 2018 and 19 with self-employment. And she says, well, you're not going to qualify. You'll qualify under the CERB, so go apply for that. And I said, but the media told us that if you applied after March 15th, you'll just roll right into that. She goes, you're going to need to apply separately because you didn't, you made enough money, but you weren't enrolled in the self-employment program to blah, 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 blah. And I just thought, oh, my God, this is just stupid. Right. So now when I get time today or tomorrow, I've got to apply, all through the hoops and bells and whistles, even though the media said if you applied anyways, you're going to be rolled into the regular EI, and that's apparently not the case.
No, if you
Fake
apply
news, Jeff, fake news.
The CERB is like 4 questions. It's very easy, but if you're applying for it separately, it really is the easiest government program I've ever applied for. But if you qualify for EI, you're supposed to do EI, and then once you do all the same, no, yes, no questions on a weekly report, but they pay you from the CERB fund and auto enroll you into the CERB fund on the initial one. Sorry, what was it?
Well, Matthew, do you or does anyone know? Of course, 3 weeks after 3 weeks into filling out my EI reports, figuring I was going to be okay on the regular filing, that's when I took Trish home. So, of course, to truthfully answer the question, was I looking for work each day, available for work each day, the answer changed to no. But I sent them a letter on that saying, this is why it's changed. And on the CERB, do you have to fill out a weekly thing on the CERB?
No. Oh God, no.
If you're only applying and doing it through the CERB program, you just fill out a monthly report. It takes 2 seconds, and you get $2,000 a month. But if you're doing the EI and then auto enrolled into the CERB, you fill out every 2 weeks as per normal your EI report, but you're being paid from CERB.
But now that I've been told just to do CERB only, what are they asking every month? Was I available to work each day?
No, it's not like EI. It's just, did you earn X number of dollars last month? Did you lose your job from COVID-19? Then
what I'm trying to get at is, I want to be honest with them. If they're asking the same questions as EI, truthfully, I can't look for work while I'm looking after Trish.
But who's going to know that?
Well, that's true, but
it's the modern age. It's not like any of us are walking around. Most of us are looking for our jobs by chatting with other industry people, looking online on Indeed, on Go2HR, and all that sort of thing. Take 2 seconds every day, go to Indeed.com, type in tourism jobs. You've been searching that day.
But isn't there also something about that you're looking after a dependable person? There would be Trish.
EI does have their dependence aspect to it, yeah.
There's that as well, yeah.
Yeah,
which is the same as well for the rental subsidy, because if anyone here qualifies for the rental subsidy, then you normally would only be getting $300 per month from the beginning of the month until whenever the program ends. But if you have a dependent, it will give you $500 per month.
Did anyone in the last few days, since the provincial government of BC has said that you can get $1,000?
Just to start on May 1st.
Yes, I applied.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I applied. I haven't received.
Jeff, about the $1,000?
Yeah. Did you apply for that yet?
What is it?
Well, the government of BC has offered a one-time only payment of $1,000. I think it's tax-free. Who can speak more on that?
If you qualified for the CERB program, you in BC are entitled to a one-time payment so far. They may change that later on, of $1,000. It doesn't affect your EI or any other aspects of it. It's not taxed.
And once you were enrolled, it takes 10 days to get the money.
Yeah, Up to 10 days before it's given to you, yes. You don't have to apply now. The program is staying open until December 2nd of this year. So you can apply at any time to get that $1,000. You don't have to do it now.
And you apply on the same site as you do the CERB?
No. It's because it's administered by the province. So you go to BC, the province of BC website. It's very quick very quick. It didn't take long at all. But yeah, it'll come up, and I haven't received a confirmation that I have been accepted in the program. My girlfriend has. She received her confirmation that she's been accepted and that her money was going to be deposited within 5 days. So it's working. They're just working through. We applied at the same time, so it's just, I think, just a backlog.
Cool. Thank you. I didn't know that.
I actually have a question for someone here. Maybe you guys seem to be very informed on this. I kind of looked this up. When I applied for this whole situation, I got put into the EI end of things instead of the CERB thing. Is there a difference between the two? Is there a pro for going? Is there a reason why I should go CERB versus EI? Because I didn't really work for a company last year, and I made that clear to them. So I'm not sure why.
There's a number of reasons why you'd want to. One, remember, there's usually, because I haven't heard otherwise, you usually only have 3 weeks before you can potentially lose benefits through EI. If you're qualified for EI and you wait longer than 3 weeks, you can lose those benefits.
Yeah.
If you apply through your CERB, separately, well, that's just the length of the program, which is right now 16 weeks. We may end up seeing, and I expect it to be sent for longer. If you apply for EI, they automatically enroll you for CERB. You get your 16 weeks of that, and then, so far as I understand, you're auto-enrolled in the EI program, and you're not losing any benefits and that sort of thing. You go through and you're being paid, because remember, they're being paid for two different funds. The CERB program was $80 billion that the federal government put out, and then the EI fund is one that we have all been paying into for one way or another as employees, if we're employees and that sort of stuff, 4 years and that sort of thing. So if you're qualified for EI, they have said, apply for it through EI, get that done. We will auto enroll you into the CERB program, because that ensures that you're going to get all of the benefits appropriately.
Okay, because all right.
For Marion, I just got a message. I applied for both, and EI sent me a letter that I qualified for CERB, and you get a message to fill out a bi-weekly report. When you get your EI approved, and when you get your EI approved and you make your report just like you do for regular EI, they're going to fill out and have you fill out the same questions, but you're going to be paid for $1,000 every 2 weeks rather than $2,000 every 4, but it's still the same money. It's still the CERB money, right?
But for EI, you need to have worked for the same company 600 or 650 hours, right?
Whatever the insurable hours are for the Vancouver area. I think it's actually 700 hours, I think. So,
yes, but that is for the year 2019, correct?
Yeah.
Or
no,
like the fiscal year of 2019?
It's for your previous 52 weeks by the time you get your layoff notice, and you'll file for it.
Okay.
Because I worked for 2 employers last year and I contracted. So I put all of that in. I put in my highest weeks of work, and it came through. Quickly, yes, Jeff, Aaron has come back.
Yeah, Aaron, he's trying to get back on and he can't.
He's back in. He's back in.
Oh, he's back in. Aaron, someone was asking when you're doing tours, if and when you're doing tours.
Oh, I look forward to again. Just before the COVID restrictions landed, we actually had a penthouse tour at that time, and we debated in the days prior, thinking should we cancel? We kind of felt like it's and it kind of became a sort of situation where we just thought, well, I guess we probably have to. It just seemed like that was the way that everything was going. And that when I'm not working on books or doing some of the tour guide stuff or any of the other things I do, I suppose I do some other work in the concert production business. And I remember, I think I had a show the early March, and that night the tour manager of the act and I were talking, thinking, gee, this doesn't look good. It feels like everything's looking to get to a lot of postponements and cancellations coming up. And that was right at the beginning of it. Within 96 hours of that, 72 to 96 hours, all the work that I did in that arena evaporated. There were multiple cancellations and postponements and concert tours, big and small, coming through Vancouver, and it all just disappeared. So that was a pretty strange experience. And it's funny, I remember writing, and I took it out of the book. I should have kept it in. I remember writing in Vancouver After Dark that, the only thing that really seems, the record industry kind of took a beating, but people still like going out and having a live experience. And the only thing that might curtail that is if we see anything like the Spanish flu epidemic of 1919. And sure enough, a few months later, killing myself for not including that book, I would have seemed like a prophet or something that would have been the case. But yeah, so I'm not doing anything right now. I'm anxious to do that again, but we're kind of waiting, as I'm waiting in terms of the concert industry too, like with this restriction on gatherings of less than 50 people, that really doesn't affect so much the tours that I do, although the tours kind of are right around that number in the Penthouse thing, but certainly in the concert business, that's kind of unworkable, especially obviously at the stadium or the arena level, but even at the nightclub and small theater level, it gets a bit dicey. And the main thing is that in terms of touring acts, a lot of them just postponed to the fall, just not wanting to take a chance. And I've seen some now postponed to next year altogether. I have a feeling that it'll come back quicker than that, especially on a local level. But it seems tough going for a little while yet, that we got to deal with this situation. That it would be nice to, if tours that are, if you operate more outdoors outside of a specific venue like that, you may have a better go of it. Again, so much of this depends on not so much on us and our interest and ability and to want to get involved in doing these things. It sort of depends on the consumer, whether they feel safe enough to go out and spend some money and go out again. So I'm hoping people will feel like that. And it's very gloomy to think about things, at least in the present right now, and maybe the next couple of months. But if history tells us anything, after the Spanish flu epidemic of 1919, we did have the Roaring 20s. So we can maybe anticipate a party over the next 10 years as life comes back to normal. I'm hoping so anyway.
We are in the 20s now, so we'll just do it essentially.
Well, that's just it. Yeah, so hopefully maybe things. And then, of course, we have to worry about the depression of 2030 or something like that. Once, if history is going to totally repeat itself again, not decade by decade, you might have to worry about that in a world war after that. But I think, as I've been talking to people, it's going to take a while yet, I think, but I think people will be surprised how quickly we do return back to normal in both good and bad habits, probably, in that regard. And I'm hoping that that's kind of sooner than later, and we'll all look back on this period as something. What a strange thing that was that we all had to deal with for that year or those many months, So I'm hoping that we will be able to get some gatherings together again, whether they're small, like I know if you're an individual tour guide, perhaps you can manage and still effectively operate with a half dozen guests, maybe a dozen, I know some bigger operations, it doesn't make sense for them to even open for that little. I can only imagine what folks at Landsea Tours are looking at they bought those big buses, those big coach buses that you see around town, that costs a heck of a lot of money to not only buy, but to continue to operate. And gas is cheap. Of course, we have that right now, but we can't go anywhere. But I'm hoping that eventually, this will lift, and I think it'll lift a little sooner than people are anticipating. Right now, I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, we're going to have to wait till 2021." I don't think so. I wouldn't be surprised if in the coming months we start to see so slowly but surely. There won't be a VE day. There won't be a D day that we can point to and say, "Wow, that finally changed." But slowly but surely, I think it's going to be inching along, and maybe not as fast as we want. But that's my gut instinct on this. I could be wrong.
Can you draw any comparisons to post 9/11 touring, just on your experience? I mean, I don't know.
Oh yeah, well, it's interesting. In the wake of that, I after in September 2011, I there were a lot of people. We had my band at the time, the Town Pants I was playing with. We had a tour in Europe, a 2-month tour in Europe, and then 2 months in the States, where we were going to go through New York. And almost immediately, some of the booking agents said, "Do you guys still want to come, or are you are you going to stay home?" And I said, "No." We were like, "Let's go for it." I was ready and raring to go. I thought it all the more interesting to get out there and see it. It didn't affect necessarily, the effects of that were over quite quickly in terms of. I remember specifically 9/11. You're sort of thinking that immediate, especially if you lived in a condo tower, you thought, "Is it my next or something?" That day, it felt so weird that life had been turned upside down. That you thought, "Is this going to start happening all over the world?" Pretty soon after that, there was a sense that this was the incident, and if you lived somewhere else, your life was going to continue on as normal. I think in the immediate wake of that, yeah, probably there was. I wasn't so necessarily connected to the tour guide business or the hospitality or business as such at that time. I was strictly just working as a musician in 2001 and didn't notice it probably as many others did in terms of the drop off in tourism. But I think it came back within fairly quickly in that sense. I have to maybe defer to somebody who was in the business at that time, but. In our case,
mostly in the sense of how these public venues, I guess, it's one thing. Now people are worried about an invisible thing. At the time, they didn't know if what was going to happen.
Oh, sure, yeah,
and that sort of stuff, and not so much the guiding thing. I know that was a later part of your careers.
Yeah, certainly. I was at the Commodore Ballroom the night of the Bataclan incident in Paris, which was the shooting incident there that night when the Eagles of Death Metal rock and roll band was playing there, and there was that mass shooting incident right in the middle of the club. And Bataclan is about the same size as the Commodore, and believe me, everybody else that was sort of there that night kind of looked around at each other and think, "God, is this what we're going to have to?" And it felt a little scary. It felt like, well, that is on the other side of the world, but it's just not. That's what those people probably thought too. It's. And then that I noticed there was an immediate sort of raise in security on everybody, and they were now sort of metal detector wanding everybody that came into a venue.
Mm-hmm.
And it slowed things down, of course, to get people in. And at the stadium level, there were some bigger stadium shows where they had to let people know, "Listen, you need to get down like 90 minutes before doors officially open. You got to get and got to get people through it." And a lot of people didn't. And there were some shows, I think U2 played one year where, not everybody was in the building yet. And the band was scheduled to go on stage. And there was a matter of, if we don't go on now, we can't go on past a certain hour here, the show had to start. And there were a lot of people that complained about that. They began to negotiate that better. There was that incident concert in Manchester as well. That was an incident, but it seemed like life sort of got back to normal fairly quick. In the coming month or two afterwards, that we forgot about that issue again. So it's hard to say. It feels like, in talking with some people that are in the hospitality business. I remember a month ago, people were saying, I'd like to see in June, as far ahead as June, it'd be nice to see not necessarily the light at the end of the tunnel, but just the idea that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I certainly, and it stuck in my head, thinking that that was the case. I'm just taking this opportunity off essentially from work or consistent work to, as I say, I'm starting research on another book. And just working on a couple of other projects that if I can just keep busy, because I'm imagining when the world does return back to normal, it's going to be so busy, and people is going to be such a rush to do. People want to get to do everything. Go out and see people again. Do tours. Go see shows. Go see everything that maybe will. We're going to be so busy. We're going to wish that we had the time off that we had right now. I'm hoping that might be the case. I'm always a sort of a positive person thinking that way.
The national kind of lobby association group Destination Canada has really got to focus on hyper local and local domestic marketing for the next year or so to try and get Canadians within their borders traveling and staycations a bit more. I'm just curious whether or not if it's come up or if it's something you're discussing when you get talking to Danny at the nightclub and anybody else that you're talking about with some of these owners and that, where the Commodore, the Rio Theater, the Penthouse for certain point of view anyway, a number of the other ones, they start if they get any idea about focusing on a real local campaign to get them. I know, like, we've had the Railway Club having issues and trying to get consistently people coming in, and the Biltmore, where there's these always been a struggle to try and maintain crowd size and revenue and business, and that's it would be great if people would start looking on a local sense towards these small businesses on a nightclub sense rather than in a hospitality sense, not just the grocery stores, once it gets to the point where it can be opened up.
I think so. I think you'll see that, especially, I'm thinking right off the top of my head in terms of the concert industry, there's not going to be many acts touring in the beginning. While you'll still have this urge that, okay, now we can open up, we got to get somebody to play here, so there'll be quite an urge probably to maybe get some local acts, or there might be some local bands that have broken up a couple of years ago getting a proper to play again to redo something. So I think you'll see that. I think as I say, that the restaurant industry has really taken it upon themselves. You can tell that they're really trying to come up with any and all ideas that might work. It feels like that the industries where a lot of people gather, like concert industry, maybe like some of the tour guide business, and where you're going to have a group of people together. That's sort of the next step. That's the next phase. There's some unpublished government document that's listing the 5 phases of how we're going to get back to normal again. That somebody told me about. I wish I could produce it for you here. I might get it in my email inbox later today. If you want to see it, I'll pass it on. Don't tell you where you got it from. Destroy after reading and whatnot. Flash the lights twice, and I'll leave it by the waste paper basket, and we'll do a trade-off or something. But apparently, there's somebody. I think this is the provincial government out east, somewhere maybe even Saskatchewan, where they had mapped out a certain plan, a sort of a 5-step plan, and the restaurants were about sort of the 3rd phase in, and the club business and nightclub business was sort of the 4th. We're not sure what leaves the 5th. Probably the stadiums and cruise ships, for all I know. I'm not sure. I haven't read the document.
Larger open tour segments and that.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. How it develops. As I say, I think we're kind of stuck for the time being. I'm both sort of half impressed, half shocked, and maybe scared to see how quickly the United States seems to be wanting to open things up again, while at the same time predicting that there's going to be a fairly considerable amount of COVID-19 deaths in the coming way. So much of our business is tied, to the States, and equally so from in the concert business. A lot of the tours that we see up in Canada of acts, it's not necessarily bands that have come to do a specific Canadian tour sometimes, but it's more often they're doing a bunch of shows touring in the States, and then they dip up here and do a Canadian run. So, the concert business is so sort of reliant on the health of the American business being good for it to be good here. I wonder how that also interplays with the tourism business. That if tourism is starting to feel a little bit better in America, that people are coming over, that they're also going to nip up to see us here in Canada as well. That plays a factor, and that will depend on the American success, or how much the problem is being able to be successfully dealt with.
Unfortunately, being as it has for years, our proximity to Seattle means it's relatively easy for a lot of anyone coming into Seattle, doing a concert, doing a tour,
Yeah.
as long as they can get the authorization to cross the border,
Yes. Yeah.
that aspect.
And I think the border crossing thing will start to get lifted. We'll see that soon enough. It probably in a slower measures, or there might be some grade of that, but yeah, it's hard to say. I think we have to deal with it for the next little while, probably longer than we want to or wish to. But it's a good time to try and research maybe some new ideas, and specifically what you can do in terms of your own part of town, or your city where you might find, if there's some places I have in the back of my mind that I've never been into, that you wonder, geez, how could I get in there to see that place? And maybe if it's an interesting enough spot, be able to do a tour there. And
you need to contact John Atkin. He's gotten into a couple places.
Yes, he has. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
the Broad Street Bridge little tower there on the top.
Yes. I was going to say that.
Stands out to me, and I suggested to John. I said, John, you could make a mint if you're going to be so many people want to get up in there, but unfortunately, you have to stop a lane of traffic to get in there. I just came up, actually. I talked to him not long ago about this. And so it's not easy to do. It's not as though you're just opening a door on the stairway to get up there, unfortunately. But there's a few other places in town that are especially downtown.
I think it was through John about, I want to say 10 years ago. He got us inside the Vancouver Block clock, which is the famous big clock across from the old Eaton's Nordstrom store on Granville.
Yeah. Great, that would be amazing. Or the Sun Tower. There's a favorite of mine, because I live quite close to it. I'm at the east end of Falls Creek, right nearby my place. Just as you enter Chinatown, is the old Murrin substation building, which is this sort of massive sort of brick. But they got a couple windows, and you can look in there, and you can see all these sort of Buck Rogers type panels, these electrical panels, and you think, I guess this, it's obviously an energy substation and whatnot. But you think there's got to be a story that's been here, since the 30s, and it'd be interesting to find out what goes on. And so there's lots of different little places like that that are sort of lying in wait. That you just have to kind of walk around and look around and see if sometimes it takes a little bit of detective work to get some access to find out who's going to let you in there, and how professionally you sound in terms of your pitch. You're a reputable person that they can maybe send one employee down to open up the doors for you so you can take these people around. But if you have a record as a tour guide like that's the kind of thing that makes a difference, that you're not just some Joe off the street, to maybe be able to get into some of these places or interesting spots or whatnot.
I think the holy grail for a lot of people in the history and tourism side of things is Riverview.
Sure. Yeah,
but that's so tightly locked down under BC housing that it's takes a miracle to be able to get in there for that. So,
yeah,
I've never been through there. It is. I was very fortunate to get a tour with BC housing last year.
Wow, that's great.
It was
really nice. Yeah, in the case of the Western Bayshore, in 2012 when I'd written an article about how, as I mentioned, I think earlier, about Howard Hughes staying at the Bayshore for 6 months in '72. I called the Bayshore up and got a hold of the general manager, and I said, look, this is coming up, and I think it'll be a bit of a boon for free advertising for the hotel, and I really marketed this would be this is a city heritage and history group. It's not it's not just a bunch of sort of yahoos coming down to just get a peek at a $1,000 a night hotel room to see what that entails. And we did have some colorful people show up, for that thing. But it was great because it got covered in CBC News did a feature on it, and it got a little bit of a press attention around town. And they were so happy that with the covers they got, the general manager offered me the room free for the night. So it's there's little things to find out there, and if you can sound affable and interesting and professional enough, I think a lot of people are, and you get the handle to maybe speak to them to say, this is what I can do for you. This is how it's going to how we're going to deal with it, and seem open to their suggestions and this and that. It can be interesting. It can definitely be an interesting thing. So it's a good time to research, I think, overall. And maybe get some new ideas for tours, or maybe you see a spot that you walk by all the time and think, what the hell is that anyway? What, why is that there like that? And maybe do some digging to find out, why is that the case, or find out the mystery of
we did that one night. I had a friend, he lived up at 22nd and Canby. Years later, I lived in that same area, but between 20th and 21st Avenue, there used to be a building set back from the street, and it was unmarked and dark, and I thought, what the hell is this? So I said to my friend, let's go up and knock on the door. And this was after 7 o'clock at night or something like that. Now, you're old enough to remember the old fire department call boxes that used to be on not quite every corner, but there was a box. You could open it up and pull a lever, and it would alert the fire department that there was a fire in the area. These were set up years ago before everybody had a telephone, an old-fashioned landline, and that's the building where the alarm went off. And the fire department invited us in, and they showed us how the whole thing worked. They were bored; they had nothing to do. Eventually the city of Vancouver phased those things out, and they were, that building was torn down. There's like a 4-story condo there now, or townhouse complex, whatever. But it was one of the most fascinating days of my life. And of course, we had no cameras with us as kids at that era. I was probably 12 or 13 or 14 or whatever, but that's where it used to. It was a little nondescript building on Canby, right about 21st Avenue there. Gone now.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, there's all sorts of little spots there, and I long eventually to do the Chuck Davis walk every street in the city of Vancouver myself. To maybe see a couple places in a couple of neighborhoods that I haven't spent as much time in, to maybe notice something and think, why is that? What is that doing there? And maybe and so often you do hear a story or find out something interesting that you think it'd be great to show other people this if you can. And if you put a couple of dollars in your jeans for your time, all the better.
All right.
Quickly there, Aaron, I put out your Arsenal Pulp, your publisher for your books and all that.
Oh, yeah.
So I follow you on Facebook, and I know that you put up a promo code and a sale and all that not too long ago about that. So I put it up there as well. Is there anything else in terms of these you want to mention? I didn't get to see you the night that the launch was there. Obviously, it was a busy, packed place, which was great.
Oh, yeah.
So, next time I see you at one of them, I'm going to get the rest of them autographed from you.
Oh, sure. So. Anytime. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
All right.
I'm on. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I'm easily found if you have another question or you want to follow up something or you got an idea that.
Aaron, what on your Facebook page? What picture am I looking for there? In case there's other Aaron Chapmans. I know you're a member of the Facebook group, the Sentimental Vancouver. I'm on that.
Yes. Yeah. I'm Aaron Chapman. I think my URL is facebook.com Aaron Chapman in Vancouver. Right. Oh, there it is. Yeah. There's the one of the Stanley Park Lionsgate Lions with a mask over his a PPE mask over his face. I may change that photo later today. Actually, I was getting bored of that. But you can find me on there on Twitter, the Aaron Chapman, on Instagram, that Aaron Chapman. I'm easily found enough. If you do a little search or something, let me know. Send word if you've got something going or something interesting, or you got a question about something I've done, or happy to chat with you.
All right, we'll hang up for now, and then I'm going to try to find your page. I'll send you a text.
Yeah.
All right, I got to give Trish lunch and so on and so on. So this has been great. Thank you, Aaron. We'll certainly.
Thanks, pleasure. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks, man.
We'll contact you again and get you at a real meeting. One of our.
Yeah. Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
You're welcome. Yeah. Matthew, thanks again, and blah, blah, blah. Everybody else, blah, blah, blah. Next week, Tuesday, May 12th at 11 a.m. and blah, blah, blah.
Thank you, everyone. I'll get the video up on YouTube so everyone can check it. I know we lost a few people in the middle there. So, hi, Trish.
Hi.
She's saying hi. Can you say hello again?
Hi.
Oh, now you're blocking her view of the TV. So, okay, everybody. Thanks
Sounds
a million.
good.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.